Evan never expected to find anything alive in that old warehouse. But when he pushed the rusty door open, he froze. Inside a broken crate lay a tiny white tiger cub, shivering in the cold, its whiskers tipped with frost. Someone had left it to die. In that moment, Evan pulled off his jacket, knelt down, and covered the cub, choosing hope over cruelty and starting a rescue he would never forget. Where are you watching from? Comment your city or country below, and if this moment touches your heart, please like and subscribe for more true stories of courage, healing, and second chances. The old warehouse door screeched open, echoing across the empty lot. Cold air rushed out, sharp and biting, carrying the sour stench of gasoline and damp cardboard. Evan Miller pulled his jacket tighter as he stepped inside. The place looked abandoned. Rows of rusted barrels, stacks of broken pallets, oil stains blackened into the concrete. He wasn't supposed to be here alone. But a tip about strange animals kept nagging at him, and he couldn't wait until backup arrived. His boots crunched across spilled dog kibble scattered like gravel, and for a second, the silence pressed down so heavy it almost rang in his ears. Then he froze. A sound, soft, low, almost like a sigh. Not quite a growl, not quite a purr. He knew that sound. He'd heard it once at a sanctuary training session. A Pruston, a tiger's friendly chuff. His pulse quickened. He moved slowly past the barrels, heart pounding with every echo of his steps. And then he saw it. A wooden crate pushed against the far wall. Mesh torn, latch bent, streaks of something dark and dried clinging to the slats. Inside, curled into the corner like a pile of rags, was a small white shape. Evan's breath caught. It was a tiger cub. No bigger than a medium-sized dog, its pale fur trembled with each weak shiver. Frost had gathered on its whiskers too. Its tiny sides rose and fell too slowly, too shallow. The white stripes along its body looked more like fading shadows than markings. The cub tried to lift its head but barely managed. Then it made the sound again, a weak chuff, like it was trying to greet him through the cold. Evan's training screamed at him, "Don't touch. Don't interfere until the vet arrives." Rules existed for a reason. Direct human contact could harm the animal or make it associate people with safety. That's how cubs turned into pets, and then tragedies. But standing here, watching the life shiver out of the little body in front of him, the rules felt like ice themselves, rigid, unyielding, deadly. If they waited too long, this cub wouldn't last. He crouched, studying the crate. The lock was nothing more than a nail jammed into the loop. Someone hadn't cared enough to even secure it properly. He pulled out his phone, snapping quick photos of the scene. The crate, the spilled kibble, the dried stains, anything that might become evidence later. His fingers shook from more than the cold. Carefully, he shrugged off his outer jacket and draped it over the top of the crate to block the draft. Then he slid a flannel shirt halfway under the crate's edge, just close enough for the cub to feel some warmth without him crossing the line completely. The cub stirred. Its eyes blinked open, pale, unfocused, one slightly off-center. Evan felt a pang in his chest. Something wasn't right. He pulled the phone out again and spotted a stack of papers on a nearby table. Curiosity tugged harder than caution. He flipped through them quickly, shipping forms, half-filled vet notes, scribbled family trees. His stomach sank. The same names repeated over and over. Cousins bred to cousins, fathers to daughters. Generations of inbreeding, all for the rare white coat that drew money from roadside zoos. He saw notes scrawled in red ink: strabismus, murmurs, eye defects. This cub wasn't just abandoned, it was the product of a cruel business model. A soft sound pulled him back. He looked at the crate again. The cub's eyes found him, faintly glowing in the thin morning light. Another chuff, even weaker than before. Evan's throat tightened. He called Hank on the transport team, then Dr. Marisol, the mobile vet. His words came quick, clipped. White tiger cub, hypothermic, warehouse on county line, breathing shallow, responsive but weak, sending location now. He slid the files into his jacket pocket, then crouched again beside the crate. He pressed his gloved knuckles against the mesh. The cub's nose nudged weakly toward the touch, its breath fogging against the leather. That tiny spark of life, fragile, desperate, was enough to hold him there, waiting for the sound of sirens. He knew he couldn't break the rules completely, but he also knew he couldn't just stand back and do nothing. The cub chuffed once more, a whisper of trust, and Evan whispered back into the cold air, "Hold on, little one. Help's on the way." The mobile vet van screeched to a stop outside the warehouse, headlights cutting through the early dusk. The smell of antiseptic and warm plastic hit the air as Dr. Marisol swung the doors wide. She didn't waste a second. Gloves snapped on, supplies rolled out, and the hum of the oxygen pump filled the silence. Evan hovered nearby, heart pounding. He'd carried the crate outside and set it on a tarp, watching Nimbus, the name he'd already whispered in his mind, shiver under the thin jacket. Now the professionals were here, and yet he couldn't shake the fear that they were already too late. "Temperature's dropping fast," Marisol muttered, sliding a probe beneath the cub's flank. The digital beep came sharp and cruel. She looked up. "We're close to the line." A warming blanket wrapped around Nimbus, tubes trailing to the pump. Evan tried to steady the crate while Marisol prepared the feeding tube. His hands shook so badly the crate rattled. When the thin tube slipped, warm formula spilled across Nimbus's chin, pooling against his fur. "Easy," Marisol said firmly, not unkind. "Hold him upright. Don't let him aspirate." Evan swallowed hard, forcing his breath to slow. He lifted the cub gently, bracing Nimbus against the towel. His palms sweated through the gloves. But this time, when the tube slid past the tiny teeth, he held steady. 1 heartbeat. 2. And then swallow. Just a few drops, but enough to bring a flicker of strength to the cub's throat. The van seemed to hold its breath with him. Another swallow, another drop. It wasn't much, but it was life, and that was all Evan needed right now. Marisol nodded. "That's it. Keep him upright." Minutes dragged into hours. Every sound, the pump, the steady drip of fluids, the quiet rustle of paper towels, wove into a rhythm that marked the longest night Evan had ever lived. Each heartbeat felt borrowed, each blink a gamble. He whispered silently in his head, "Stay, stay, stay." When they paused to adjust the wrap, Evan noticed something under the fur. A faint scar across Nimbus's nose. Thin, almost healed, but unmistakable. Neglect. A sign that someone had caged him carelessly long before tonight. The sight hollowed Evan's chest. As midnight stretched into morning, the cub finally curled tighter under the blanket. Breaths still shallow, but steadier now. For the first time all night, Evan let himself exhale. He slumped against the van wall, exhaustion rolling over him. Marisol scribbled notes on a chart, her face unreadable. "We'll keep him stable through the night. Tomorrow we reassess." Evan looked down at Nimbus, his tiny chest rising under the glow of the heating lamp. No promises, no guarantees, but alive. And that was enough for now. By the time the second night came, the sky had turned wild. Winds howled through the cottonwoods, rattling the vet van like a tin can. The power lines outside swayed, groaned, and then the lights blinked once, twice, and went out. Only the narrow beam of a flashlight cut the darkness inside the van. Evan held it steady while Dr. Marisol checked the monitors. The machines had gone silent, their blinking numbers gone black. The only sound left was the heavy breath of the storm pressing against the doors. Nimbus whimpered softly, a thin cry muffled by the blankets. Evan's gut clenched. Without heat, without oxygen flow, the cold would creep in fast. "Hand me the packs," Marisol said. Her voice was calm, but her hands moved with urgency. She tore open chemical warmers and tucked them around the cub's body. The flashlight shook in Evan's hand until he braced it against his chest. Minutes felt like hours. Nimbus stirred, eyes flicking open. The little body trembled harder, trying to curl tighter under the blanket. Instinct overrode training. Evan slid down beside the crate, unzipped his jacket, and tucked Nimbus against his chest. Just for warmth. Just for a few minutes, he told himself. He could feel the fragile heartbeat against his ribs. For that moment, nothing else existed. The roar of the wind, the creak of the van, the icy air outside. It all fell away. It was just Evan, the heat of his body, and a cub fighting to live. Then Marisol's voice cut through. "Stop!" He looked up. Her flashlight beam froze him in place. "No more," she said firmly. "Too much human scent will imprint. He must stay wild." Evan hesitated, then slowly eased Nimbus back under the blanket. The cub gave a soft chuff, as if confused by the sudden distance, but settled back against the heat packs. The storm raged on, rattling the doors, threatening to tear the world apart. Evan sat in the dark, fists tight in his lap, listening to the fragile breaths that seemed to echo louder than the thunder. Hours later, as the power finally returned and the monitors blinked back to life, a new sound joined the room. A faint, irregular thump in Nimbus's chest, soft but distinct. Marisol's face tightened as she pressed the stethoscope harder. She didn't have to explain. Evan heard it in her silence. A heart murmur, likely an inbred defect. Evan leaned back, the storm still hammering the roof, but the real weight pressed inward. Saving this cub meant walking into a future where survival would always be uncertain. And yet, when Nimbus shifted and gave another faint chuff, Evan knew he couldn't turn away. Morning broke gray and heavy, the storm finally quiet, but leaving the world soaked in mud and silence. Inside the van, the air carried a stale mix of disinfectant and exhaustion. Evan rubbed his eyes, then looked down at Nimbus. The cub was still breathing, chest rising in steady rhythm, no longer fighting for every gasp. Dr. Marisol slid the portable ultrasound probe across Nimbus's belly, her face lit by the soft glow of the screen. The tiny heart flickered, irregular but strong enough. "Stable," she murmured. Evan felt a wave of relief wash through him. He leaned closer, whispering, "One more day, buddy. Just one more." But Hank, who had just arrived from the transport team, shook his head. "No. Federal law is clear. He has to be transferred to sanctuary care now. That's the only way he gets a real chance. The words hit like a stone in Evan's chest. Handing Nimbus over meant goodbye. No late nights at the van, no small victories watching each swallow of formula. He wasn't ready. Marisol packed the equipment with calm precision while Hank checked the transfer forms. Evan lingered at the crate, fingers gripping the edge. Nimbus blinked up at him, those pale, uncertain eyes searching the air as if trying to recognize him. "Look at that," Marisol said quietly, nodding toward the cub. "He's responding to scent cues. See how his nose lifts, tracking? Neurological reflexes intact." Evan swallowed hard. It should have been good news, but instead it made the moment sharper. Nimbus wasn't broken. He had a chance at a future. A real one. But it wouldn't be with Evan. Hank placed the transport carrier on the floor, its door wide open. "It's time." Evan crouched beside Nimbus one last time. He wanted to reach in, to offer comfort, but he held himself back. Instead, he pulled the jacket he'd used that first night tighter around his own shoulders, carrying the smell of it with him. Maybe Nimbus would remember. The cub hesitated, sniffed the air, then slowly crawled forward into the carrier. His paws made the faintest scrape against the plastic floor. He gave one soft chuff before curling into the corner. Evan's throat closed. He turned away quickly, blinking hard against the sting in his eyes. Hank latched the door, lifted the carrier, and in that moment, the weight of goodbye settled heavy on Evan's chest. The van doors shut with a hollow thud, and the world outside roared back to life. The wind, the mud squelching under boots, the scrape of tires against gravel. Nimbus was on his way to sanctuary, to safety, to the unknown. Evan stood in the quiet warehouse doorway long after the sound of the van had faded. The choice was never his to make, but the ache of it felt like it belonged to him alone. The Lone Mesa Sanctuary sat on the edge of rolling plains, its wide fields framed by snow-dusted fences. As the transport van pulled through the gates, Evan followed in his truck, heart heavy but unwilling to turn back just yet. Inside the nursery building, the air carried the scent of hay, warm milk, and a faint trace of chlorine from the disinfected floors. The space was quiet, almost reverent, with rows of curtained enclosures designed for animals who needed care without constant human eyes. Nora, the sanctuary director, walked Evan through the dim corridors. Her voice was steady, her posture unyielding. "Feeding happens behind curtains. Enrichment is done with scent and water, not touch. Zero direct contact. If Nimbus grows up thinking people are safe, he won't survive as a tiger." Evan nodded, though his chest tightened. He understood the rule, but part of him longed for the warmth of that tiny body pressed against his chest during the storm. They paused at Nimbus's new space. Behind a pale blue curtain, the cub shuffled, rustling straw. Evan caught the faintest sound, a soft chuff, before Nora drew the fabric closed again. Later that afternoon, a man in a tailored coat arrived, his polished shoes loud against the concrete floor. Evan recognized him from donor dinners, always more interested in publicity than animals. The man glanced at the curtains, unimpressed. "This cub should be on display," he insisted. "People will pay good money to see a rare white tiger. You need funding, don't you?" Nora's eyes hardened. "If we use him for profit, we're no better than the cage he came from." The silence that followed was tense enough to cut. The donor huffed, muttered something about wasted potential, and stormed out. That night, Evan wandered the quiet halls alone. He stopped by the records office, its shelves stacked with files of past rescues. One binder caught his eye: photographs of a cross-eyed adult white tiger, notes about chronic joint pain and heart murmurs, a life twisted by generations of inbreeding. Evan closed the file with a heavy hand. Nimbus's future could so easily mirror that tiger's, and yet, if the sanctuary's rules held firm, maybe, just maybe, this cub could break free of that fate. He leaned against the wall, listening. Somewhere behind a curtain, Nimbus shifted again, paws scratching lightly in the straw. A life beginning over, hidden from the world, but safe. For the first time since that freezing warehouse, Evan felt a fragile thread of hope. Days turned into weeks, and Nimbus began to grow into himself. Evan visited the sanctuary whenever he could, though always from behind curtains or observation blinds. He had to remind himself constantly. This wasn't about bonding. This was about giving Nimbus the chance to become what he was meant to be. One morning, Nora invited Evan to stand quietly behind a slotted panel as they introduced Nimbus to water. A shallow pool glimmered under the barn's skylight. At first, Nimbus sniffed at the edge, pawing hesitantly. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, he leapt in. Water splashed high, droplets scattering like fireworks. Nimbus stumbled, shook himself, then pounced again, this time with more confidence. A chuff burst from his throat, loud and full, as if declaring victory. Evan clenched his fist, pressing it against his thigh to keep from cheering. His heart felt ready to break through his ribs, pride swelling where words couldn't reach. For the first time, Nimbus looked less like a fragile cub fighting to survive, and more like the wild creature he was born to be. But joy has a way of drawing shadows. A week later, Nora called a staff meeting. Her expression was grim. Footage of Nimbus has been leaked. Someone recorded him in the pool and posted it online. The sanctuary phones had been ringing non-stop ever since. Offers of money, requests for tours, demands to see the rare white cub. Who would do that? Evan asked, anger creeping into his voice. Nora shook her head. One of the volunteers. They're gone now. But it means we have to tighten everything. No phones, no unsupervised shifts. Security is priority. Evan felt heat rise in his chest. Nimbus had already escaped one world of cages. Now fame threatened to build another. That evening, the sanctuary staff set up trail cameras in Nimbus's small outdoor yard. The footage they captured over the next few nights became a quiet reassurance. Alone, without human eyes, Nimbus moved naturally. He stalked shadows, pounced at insects, padded the perimeter with a low, confident stride. Most importantly, he avoided the fence line whenever voices drifted near. Instinct was winning out. Watching that grainy footage on Nora's laptop, Evan exhaled a long, shaky breath. "He's choosing to be a tiger," he whispered. Nora glanced at him, her voice soft but steady. "That's the goal. Not that he loves us, that he never needs us." Evan nodded, the truth sharp but right. He thought back to that freezing warehouse, the weak chuff through rusted mesh. And now here, Nimbus chuffing into open air, paws splashing in water, free in ways that mattered most. For the first time, Evan let himself believe the cub wasn't just surviving. He was becoming. By the time Nimbus reached 250 pounds, he no longer looked like the trembling cub Evan had first found in that filthy crate. His shoulders rippled with muscle, His paws struck the ground with quiet authority, and his eyes, still pale, still a little off-center, carried a sharpness that made Evan's breath catch. That morning, the staff gathered near the reinforced gate at the edge of the sanctuary's newest habitat. 20 acres of grassland, scattered trees, and a winding creek stretched beyond the fence. It wasn't the wild, but it was freedom compared to curtains and small yards. Evan stood just behind Nora, his palms damp despite the cold. The metal hinges creaked as the gate slid open. For a moment, Nimbus lingered at the threshold, nose testing the air, tail flicking with cautious energy. Then, with a single decisive step, he strode forward into the open space. Evan swallowed hard. His mind flashed back to the frail bundle of fur shivering under his jacket during that storm. Now every movement screamed strength. Every stride said survival. Nimbus walked down to the creek, dipped a paw in, then lowered his head to drink. When he lifted it again, water dripping from his whiskers, the morning sun lit his coat like fire on snow. Evan had to bite the inside of his cheek to stop himself from cheering out loud, but celebration was tempered by caution. Nora motioned to the GPS collar clasped around Nimbus's neck. "That stays on," she said firmly. "At least for now." One of the younger staff members frowned. "He looks perfect. Why keep him tagged like a lab subject?" "Because he isn't perfect," Nora replied. "That murmur means long-term monitoring. We owe him that." The debate carried on in low voices as Nimbus moved farther into the trees. Evan only half heard them. His focus stayed locked on the tiger's steady gait, the way he owned the space already. That night, when the first GPS data came through, Evan sat with Nora in the office as the chart drew itself across the screen. Nimbus's movements traced arcs of activity at dawn and dusk, with long rest stretches in between, healthy, natural rhythms. Evan smiled, a rare ease settling over him. He's learning to live like he should. Nora nodded, eyes fixed on the glowing lines. He's not ours anymore. He's his. Evan leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. The ache of letting go was still there, but tonight it came with something steadier. Pride. Nimbus wasn't just alive. He was free, as much as this world would allow. The conference hall buzzed with the low hum of side conversations, the kind that echoed off glass walls and polished floors. Conservationists, sanctuary directors, and reporters filled the rows, their notebooks and tablets glowing under the dim lights. Evan sat near the back, hands clenched around his badge, waiting for Nimbus's name to appear on the screen. When the charts finally lit up the projector, a hush swept across the room. Lines of movement traced across the map of the 20-acre habitat. Dawn patrols, dusk wanderings, resting zones near the creek. The numbers told a story. Nimbus was thriving. Nora stood at the podium, voice steady. "This is what happens when an animal is raised off exhibit. No cameras, no crowds. Just space, security, and the chance to reclaim instinct." Evan glanced around. He saw one woman in the second row lift her glasses to dab at her eyes. "We've always spoken in theory," she whispered to her colleague. "Now we see proof." But not everyone was moved. A journalist stood, voice sharp. "Data is powerful, yes, but the public deserves to see this animal. People donate when they connect. How do you expect to fund sanctuaries without showing the tiger itself?" The words rippled through the room. Evan felt heat rise in his chest. He knew what Nimbus had suffered. the neglect written in scars and murmurs. To put him on display again would be to repeat the same cruelty. Nora didn't flinch. "They get the data," she said firmly. "Not the tiger. His welfare isn't a spectacle. It's the standard." A murmur spread across the audience, some nodding, some frowning, some scribbling notes furiously. Evan could almost feel the divide splitting the room in half. During the break, he overheard conversations in the hallway. Some praised the sanctuary for holding firm. Others muttered about lost funding opportunities. But by the end of the day, something remarkable had begun to take root. Directors from other sanctuaries approached Nora one by one. "We're adopting the off-exhibit first model," one said. "Your results speak louder than any exhibit." Another added, "If people want to support, they'll support the mission, not the show." Evan stood to the side, letting it sink in. Nimbus, once a half-frozen cub in a crate, was now shaping policy across the continent. His quiet chuff had turned into a roar that no one in this room could ignore. For Evan, the pride was personal. He thought of the first time Nimbus splashed in water, the grainy trail cam footage of him stalking shadows, the steady lines of GPS data, proof that a life spared could ripple outward and change the way others lived too. As the conference closed, applause rose. Nora gave one last look at the room, her voice carrying calm authority. "We do not save animals to make ourselves feel better. We save them so they can live as they were meant to. Off-exhibit first. That's the future." Evan walked out into the crisp evening air, his chest lighter. For the first time, he felt the weight of Nimbus's story wasn't just his to carry. It belonged to everyone who had listened, argued, and finally understood. The Texas dusk settled soft and golden, the kind of light that made even the dry grass glow. Evan stood on the wooden watchtower, binoculars pressed to his eyes. He hadn't seen Nimbus in months, not directly, not outside of GPS charts and staff updates. Tonight, though, something told him to wait a little longer. The air was still, carrying only the faint rustle of wind through mesquite branches. Then, at the far edge of the creek, movement. A flash of white between the shadows. Evan's breath caught. There he was. Nimbus padded along the water's edge, muscles rolling beneath his coat, tail sweeping low. Bigger now, heavier, yet graceful in a way only a tiger could be. For a moment, Evan saw both, the fragile cub trembling in a crate, and this full-grown animal striding into his own life. He raised the binoculars again, holding tight as Nimbus paused. The tiger lifted his head, ears twitching, and then it came. A short, unmistakable chuff carried faintly across the water. Evan froze. His chest ached with the sound. It wasn't a call for help. It wasn't a plea. It was recognition. Safe. Seen. Nothing more. Nimbus turned without hesitation and continued along the bank, slipping into tall grass until the stripes blended with shadows. Gone just like that. Evan lowered the binoculars slowly. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, though his eyes burned. That single chuff said everything. Nimbus remembered. But he didn't need him anymore. And that was exactly as it should be. As the sky deepened to indigo, Evan climbed down from the watchtower. One of the rangers met him near the gate, handing over a folded letter. "From a local rancher," she explained. "Thought you'd want to read it." Evan unfolded the paper under the fading light. The handwriting was rough but steady. "Since the sanctuary opened, folks around here stopped breeding tigers in their backyards. Words out. It's not worth the risk anymore. Maybe that cub you saved started something bigger than you think. Evan stood there for a long moment, letter in hand, listening to the night fill with cricket song. He realized his chest felt lighter than it had in years. Nimbus had grown into himself, and somehow the world had shifted too. The journey wasn't just about one tiger anymore. It was about a change spreading outward, quiet but unstoppable, like a chuff carried on the wind. The sanctuary's community day arrived beneath a wide, cloudless sky. Families wandered the grounds, kids clutching paper maps, volunteers guiding them past exhibits of rescued hawks, foxes, and a black bear who had once lived chained behind a gas station. Laughter drifted on the air, mixed with the smell of hay and popcorn from the food stand. But there was no white tiger to be seen. Evan stood near the podium, waiting his turn to speak. From the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of the tall grass swaying beyond the sanctuary fences. Somewhere out there, Nimbus prowled unseen, free in ways no crowd could ever measure. When the microphone was handed to him, Evan cleared his throat. The small gathering hushed. He scanned the faces, curious, eager, maybe even expecting to be dazzled by the sight of a rare animal. Instead, he offered them honesty. "You came here hoping to see the white tiger," he began. "I can't show him to you, and that's the point." A ripple of whispers moved through the crowd. Evan pressed on. Real love for wildlife isn't about what we get out of them. It isn't about the photo, or the thrill, or the story we get to tell. Real love means letting them live as themselves, unwatched, unposed, unexploited. He paused, letting the words settle. A child in the front row tugged at her mother's sleeve, whispering, "He means the tiger's okay, right?" The mother nodded softly. Evan smiled faintly. Nimbus is alive. He's strong. He's out there right now, walking the grass at his own pace. You won't see him today, but that's how you'll know we did our job right. Behind him, Nora stepped forward with an announcement. From this day on, all big cats rescued here will remain off exhibit for at least 12 months. Every single one will be monitored by GPS, not by glass or bars. That's our promise. Applause rose, hesitant at first, then steady. Evan looked out at the crowd, their eyes beginning to shift, not toward what they wanted to see, but toward what they now understood. Later, as the sun began to set, Evan lingered by the fence line. The prairie beyond glowed gold, and in the distance he thought he heard it. The faintest chuff carried on the breeze. Maybe it was real, maybe only memory. Either way, it filled him with a quiet peace. He turned back toward the gathering, voice lifting one last time. If you believe these creatures deserve true freedom, drop A in the comments when you share this story. Someone out there might see it and change the way they see the wild. And with that, Evan let the moment go, the weight of it carried forward not by his hands, but by everyone willing to listen. At the end of the day, Nimbus's story reminds us that freedom, not fame, is the greatest gift we can give to wild creatures. Every choice we make matters. Do we love them for who they are, or for what we want them to be? If this journey touched your heart, hit like, subscribe, and share it with a friend. Drop a comment below. Do you believe animals deserve to live unseen, yet fully themselves? Your voice helps keep stories like Nimbus's alive.